and we are calling it iPhone.
He is loved and hated. His style is copied, and speeches from presentations are known by memory. Even more than 10 years after his death, he continues to be an idol for millions, a visionary who changed the world forever. Today on the Biographer History channel, we will talk about the life of Steve Jobs. Did he really have a complex character? Why was he kicked out of his own company? And why did they go their separate ways with Steve Wozniak? Get comfortable, we're starting.
On February 24, 1955 in San Francisco, 23-year-old Joan Schiebel gave birth to a boy. The mother immediately gave him up for adoption. The child was lucky and did not have to stay in the orphanage for a long time. The boy's adopted parents were Paul and Clara Jobs. A few years later, the family moved from San Francisco to Mountain View, at that time a small town in California, where Steve spent his childhood. Paul Jobs was an auto mechanic and earned money by repairing cars in the garage of his own house. When his son grew up, he found for him some space in the garage, taught him to use tools, and slowly began to introduce Steve to his work.
You know, he spent a lot of time with me teaching me how to build things, take things apart, put things back together. And one of the things that he touched upon was electronics. He did not have a deep understanding of electronics himself, but he'd encountered electronics a lot in automobiles and other things that he would fix. So he showed me the rudiments of electronics, and I got very interested in that.
That's how Paul Jobs helped his son realize his vocation at an early age. And 10 years later, it was in their family garage that the first Apple computers would be assembled. The city of Mountain View, where Steve lived with his parents, was part of the so-called Silicon Valley. Its history usually dates back to 1938, when the Hewlett-Packard Company, or HP, was formed. It is symbolic that this company, like Apple, was also essentially created in a garage. It was there that a guy named Bill Hewlett started working with his friend David Packard. It is no less symbolic that about 30 years later, by chance, it was Bill Hewlett who did not remain indifferent to the fate of young Steve, and at the right moment fostered the boy's interest in electronics.
When Steve was 12, he found Bill Hewlett's number in the phone book and called him. And he answered the phone, and I said, "Hi, my name's Steve Jobs. You don't know me, but I'm 12 years old, and I'm building a frequency counter, and I'd like some spare parts." And so he talked to me for about 20 minutes. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And he gave me the parts, but he also gave me a job working in Hewlett-Packard that summer.
The third key person in Jobs' life was his school teacher. Little Steve was bored in class, constantly got into various troubles, and participated in all sorts of outrages. And he was very lucky to have such a caring teacher who was able to see the great potential in the obnoxious boy and managed to direct Jobs' energy in the right direction in time.
She watched me for about 2 weeks, and she then approached me. She said, "Stephen, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I have this math workbook, and if you take it home and finish it on your own without any help, and you bring it back to me, if you get it 80% right, I will give you $5 and one of these really big suckers." She bought it. She held it out in front of me, one of these giant things. And I looked at her like, "Are you crazy, lady? You know, nobody's ever done this before." And of course I did it. And she basically bribed me back into learning with candy and money. And what was really remarkable was that, you know, before very long I had such a respect for her that I sort of reignited my desire to learn.
At the age of 16, Steve cut loose. He became interested in hippie culture, the music of Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and began using illegal substances. Fortunately, he did not become addicted, but during this period, his relationship with his parents soured. After graduating from high school, Steve went to college, but after the first semester, he dropped out. Jobs later explained that he didn't want to spend his parents' money on education, which seemed pointless to him. During the same period, a fateful meeting happened that changed the world forever. Steve Wozniak was 5 years older than Jobs.
A quick look was enough to understand that this guy was an engineering genius, to the level of which Jobs was really far. While the peers hung out with girls, Wozniak sat in the room and made all sorts of electronic gadgets. By nature, Woz was a shy, gentle, and kind guy. It did not look at all like the nervous, assertive, and skinny as a rail Jobs. At first glance, apart from the same name, they didn't have anything in common. However, the first impression was wrong. Wozniak, like Jobs, was fond of practical jokes and tricks. And then, one day, the two Steves met. The guys liked to discuss not only the technologies, but also the books that impressed them, music, and much more. Soon after meeting, the two Steves had the opportunity to work together and earn money on their passion for electronics. In the summer of 1971, the news appeared in the newspapers. Some hacker managed to create a device that connected to the phone to call other countries for free. A few weeks later, Wozniak managed to create a similar device. Friends called it the Blue Box because that's exactly what the device looked like. After playing with the invention of Woz for some time, Jobs thought that he could start selling it to friends. Steve managed to get the necessary parts. They built about 100 Blue Boxes. They sold almost all of them, making a good profit on it. In the end, it was decided to close the profitable business because the production of such boxes was a direct violation of the law and threatened big trouble. Jobs later claimed that it was the experience with the Blue Boxes that set the stage for the creation of Apple.
Us too, we didn't know much. We could build a little thing that could control a giant thing, and that was an incredible lesson. I don't think there would ever been an Apple computer had there not been blue boxing.
The two Steves learned how to work together and achieve results. Engineer Wozniak was responsible for the development of the product, and charismatic Jobs came up with how to present it to the buyer and then successfully sold it. After the story with the Blue Box, it took another 5 years for the friends to finally mature to create their own company.
For some time, Jobs worked at Atari, a company engaged in the production of games. But 6 months later, he got tired of all that, and Jobs left for India in search of deep meanings. The journey was not easy. Jobs had dysentery and lost 15 kilograms. Years later, Steve admitted that he went to India to resolve internal feelings caused by the fact that his biological parents abandoned him. For a whole month, he wandered around the country, where he became more familiar with Buddhism and with Zen. This will become his hobby for the rest of his life. Jobs wasn't just superficially interested in Zen, fascinated by its exotic aesthetics. Over time, he became a serious and diligent practitioner who undertook long meditation retreats to Tassajara, the first Zen monastery in America. Steve will spend weeks contemplating an empty wall, as Zen followers say, watching the games of his mind. The ancient teaching also influenced Jobs' work. Yamashita Ryodo, one of the most active popularizers of Japanese Buddhism in the world, said the following about Jobs' study of Zen. He didn't do any kind of marketing research. He went deep inside to see more clearly what he wanted himself. The things he made resonated deeply with others precisely because they came from a place deep inside himself. For him, the ultimate marketing research tool was discovering what exactly he himself really wanted. Many believe that it was Buddhism that helped Steve Jobs find that spiritual core, thanks to which he managed to stoically endure all the ups and downs in his life. Later, Jobs met Koben Chino Adagawa, whom he immediately recognized as his teacher. They will communicate for 30 years. Adagawa did not shave his head, as befits a monk, was married twice, drank alcohol, and referred to money lightly, and Jobs became attracted to such a person, far from the usual image of a monk. For Jobs, who himself went to lectures barefoot, did not take a shower for a long time, and spent nights alone on part-time jobs. Adagawa, who was free in private life and in thoughts, probably had a special attraction. Having given Adagawa one of his many mansions, Jobs spent almost every day with him, but the content of their conversations will remain a secret. But that will be for later. In the meantime, Jobs returns from India to his homeland and delves into the study of spiritual practices.
Wozniak, meanwhile, worked as an engineer at HP, and in his spare time, he developed the design of his first computer. From time to time, he showed the results of his work at the Homebrew Computer Club, which was the name of a gathering of guys who were just as technology mad as Woz himself. Jobs wasn't particularly interested in these meetings at first, But one day he showed up there with Woz and was stunned twice at once. First, when he realized what potential lied in the development of Woz, and how much his friend's computer surpassed everything that the others showed. And secondly, when he learned the basic principle of the club, the free exchange of knowledge. It seemed strange to the enterprising Jobs to miss the opportunity to make money on a potentially breakthrough product. So, after going to the club, Jobs began to persuade Wozniak to create his own company. He was completely risk-averse, did not want to leave HP for a long time, but eventually gave up under the unstoppable pressure of his friend. On April 1, 1976, their company was registered. Jobs came up with a simple and catchy name: Apple.
Apple fans expressed a variety of versions of how the famous company logo appeared. Someone said that it was a tribute to the revolutionary in the field of computer science Alan Turing, who died after biting an apple with cyanide. Others believed that it was a symbol of original sin or thirst for knowledge. Jobs himself explained that he just loved apples. Besides, that symbol conveyed the main idea of the brand: elegant simplicity. And the bite on the apple appeared so that it could be easily identified from another round fruit or vegetable.
The computer that Wozniak was working on was dubbed the Apple I. They assigned a devilish price of $666 for it. The computer sold well, and after 30 days, the newly minted businessmen were able to recoup the costs. And a year later, he developed the next Apple II model, which brought the company a resounding, incredible success. Let's compare them to understand why the second model became popular. The Apple I model in its original form was just a board and was far from the modern idea about a computer. In order for such a computer to work, it was necessary to independently purchase and connect power, a keyboard, a device with a screen, and so on. In those early years, computers were the entertainment of techies, and this situation was even considered an advantage. Knowledgeable people did not need a ready-made version in advance. They could assemble what they needed themselves. But the Apple II model, with the filing of Jobs, was initially created in a different format. Steve realized that for one enthusiastic technician, there were 1,000 ordinary people who were interested in a computer, but would never assemble it themselves. Therefore, the Apple II model was sold assembled in a nice beige case. Only a device with a screen had to be connected separately. This ease of use turned out to be the first decisive advantage of the Apple II. The second advantage was the affordable price of $1,300, which was achieved thanks to Wozniak, who managed to get the maximum power from an engineering point of view at the lowest cost. At that time, there were computers similar to Apple II on the market, but they cost significantly more and therefore remained inaccessible to most people. But the Apple II computer, by analogy with the iconic Ford Model T in the automotive industry, was able to become truly mass and popular, and for 16 years existed on the market.
Please put this in perspective. This computer's power compared to today's computer.
Probably 1/1,000,000th.
1,000,000.
Yeah, this one. This one has, for example, it originally came with 4 KB of memory. Now 4 GB is considered small, 1,000,000 times more. The speed of this one was 1 million, and the speed of today's is obviously several billion, so that's thousands of times more. But it did the job, and it did it well and fun, and did just what it was supposed to, and everyone who had one loved it.
There is a point of view that Jobs simply leached off of Wozniak and managed to profitably sell his developments. And Woz himself is undeservedly in the shadow in the mass consciousness. Is Steve Wozniak underestimated? Without a doubt. This genius is essentially the father of the personal computer, but unfortunately, that is how our psychology works. In the mass consciousness, such quiet geniuses are often lost against the background of bright leaders. And it was almost impossible not to get lost against the background of Jobs with his magnetic charisma. Was Jobs a genius? In the engineering sense, of course. He wasn't fit to hold a candle to his friend, but in the terms of vision, the ability to feel the future and anticipate the needs of people, Steve was undoubtedly a genius. He was able to find resources, people, and manage them. Without his participation, the invention of Woz would most likely have remained gathering dust. And thank God that the wise Wozniak understood this perfectly well.
Steve can be called an outstanding manager, if only because he always insisted that the best of the best should work at Apple and there should be no compromises in this.
The difference between a good software person and a great software person is probably 50 to 1, 25 to 50 to 1. Huge dynamic range. And therefore, I have found, and not just in software, but in almost everything I've done, it really pays to go after the best people in the world. It's painful. It's very painful when you have some people that are not the best people in the world, and you have to get rid of them. But I found that my job has sometimes been exactly that, to get rid of some of the people that didn't measure up. At times, I've been pretty hard about it. And a lot of times people haven't wanted to leave, and I haven't given them any choices. So if somebody wanted to write a book about me, most of my friends would never talk to them, but they could go find the handful of a few dozen people that I'd fired in my life that hated my guts.
Steve is well known for his rigidity and demanding attitude to subordinates. And in his youth, on top of that, he was a real asshole. He was constantly rude. He shouted and insulted people at meetings.
Usually, biographers try not to focus on this side of his personality, but the fact remains that Jobs often behaved like a real tyrant, preferring threats. He was parking his unregistered Mercedes in handicapped spaces. He brought his colleagues to tears. Steve was ruled by chaos. First, he seduces you, then ignores you, and then denigrates you, complains former Jobs subordinate engineer Bob Belleville. And on top of all this is a demonstrative contempt for charity, stock exchange frauds, and the horrors of Foxconn. Foxconn is a Taiwanese company that manufactures components for Apple and other companies. Human rights activists believe that employees in factories work in inhumane conditions, child labor is used, irregular hours are not paid, and accidents at work happen almost every day. Jobs himself once told his biographer, "I don't think I run roughshod over people, but if something sucks, I tell people to their face. It's my job to be honest. I know what I'm talking about, and I usually turn out to be right." That's the culture I try to create. We are brutally honest with each other, and anyone can tell me they think I am full of shit, and I can tell them the same. That's the ante of being in the room. You've got to be able to be super honest.
In addition to these, here is a small but very interesting detail. According to Wozniak, for more than 30 years since they met, Jobs never raised his voice at him.
Years later, financier Lawrence Levy, who worked with Jobs at Pixar, also noted that Steve never allowed himself to be disrespectful to him. However, as his biographer, Walter Isaacson, wrote, Jobs could seduce and charm people at will, and he liked to do so. Jobs could be charming to people he hated just as easily as he could be insulting to people he liked.
At that time, it became obvious that due to his youthful immaturity, 22-year-old Steve was not yet able to manage a fastly growing company. As a result, it was decided to appoint a third-party president at the shareholders' meeting. The company needed some experienced person who could rein in Jobs and take control of the situation. Such a person was found, and almost immediately, he had a war with Steve, the apogee of which was a comical situation with personal numbers that all Apple employees had. Jobs and Wozniak were assigned 1 and 2 numbers. For educational purposes, the president assigned the first number to Woz and the second to Jobs. Steve swore and argued for a long time, and in the end managed to get a 0 number for himself. After this incident, the offended Jobs decided to start a new project and prove to everyone that he is able to create a decent product without the help of Woz. Before we look at Steve's new project, let's take a step back to 1975. Around that time, Jobs met a girl named Chrisanne. He had quite a strange relationship with her. For several years, they did not seem to be formally a couple, but from time to time, they still slept together. It all ended with Chrisanne being pregnant. By that time, Apple was already developing in full swing, and Jobs completely plunged into work, pretending that there was no pregnancy and ignored his girlfriend. As a result, Chrisanne independently decided to give birth, and in 1978 was born a girl named Lisa. Jobs demanded a paternity test. It showed that Lisa was his daughter. Nevertheless, young Steve remained a true asshole and said that the test could be wrong. In general, he refused to take any responsibility. and the offended Chris Ann took Lisa and disappeared from his life. Ironically, at that time, Steve was 23 years old, the same age as his biological mother was when she abandoned him. 1978. Chris Ann leaves with his daughter. Jobs begins developing a new computer and calls it Lisa. Steve's name was already taken at that time. The whole situation with his daughter was leaked to the press. Therefore, everyone understood where this name for a computer came from. But Jobs stubbornly denied any connection with his daughter, according to his version. Lisa is allegedly an acronym that stands for Local Integrated Systems Architecture. It sounds complicated and far-fetched, so the team of engineers who understood everything used their mocking version of Lisa. Lisa invented stupid acronym. Only one thing was certain in this situation, despite all the desire of Jobs to prove his independence. The prototype of the computer turned out to be completely unremarkable. And then an event happened that changed everything. In the summer of 1979, one of the Silicon Valley companies called Xerox decided to invest shares in Apple. Jobs agreed to the deal on the condition that Xerox would give him access to its own developments. Steve was told that there was something to look at there. At that time, users interacted with the computer by entering commands on the keyboard. This technology was called a command line interface. And let's face it, it was not convenient for ordinary users. Xerox developed a graphical user interface, which is familiar to us all because it is used on modern devices. It is based on graphic elements, windows, folders, shortcuts, which you can interact with the mouse cursor. In fact, already in 1979, Xerox had at its disposal a prototype of a technology that would determine the future.
What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea, and it was there, and they'd done the work really well. But within 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all the computers would work like this someday. You could argue about how many years it would take you could argue about who the winners and losers might be. It was so obvious.
The management of Xerox did not have time to realize how revolutionary the graphical interface was, but ordinary employees understood the full value of development and hid it from Jobs until the last moment, trying to interest him in other insignificant projects. But thanks to his phenomenal intuition, Steve sensed a trick and eventually managed to get everything shown to him. As you probably have already guessed, Jobs completely ripped off all the developments of the graphical interface from Xerox. Xerox executives did not realize until the last moment that they had signed a death sentence for the company in exchange for a bundle of Apple shares. If Xerox had its own Jobs at the head, it could now be the largest and most high-tech company in the world. But in the end, we have only an instructive experience of a phenomenal failure.
So they just grabbed defeat from the greatest victory in the computer industry. Xerox could have owned the entire computer industry company and could have been a company 10 times its size.
Recalling his crusade to Xerox, Jobs pathetically uttered a quote of Picasso, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." Perhaps Steve would not have been so proud if he had known what a mockery of fate would come to him like a boomerang in just a few years. In the meantime, the inspired Jobs rushed to his native company with a revolutionary idea. An unpleasant surprise was waiting for him there. There were a lot of people in Apple who, like the Xerox management, failed to comprehend the prospects of the graphical interface. Constant scandals and showdowns began, as a result of which the Lisa project team complained about Steve to the management. The president of the company, whose task was to keep Jobs on a tight leash, did not hesitate to remove him from management. So, Steve was left without a project that he named after his daughter. After a short pause, Steve started looking for a new project. Soon, he got acquainted with a small team of Apple employees who were working on a prototype computer named after the Macintosh Apple variety.
Jobs decided to take patronage of the project.
The Macintosh team enthusiastically accepted the prototype of the graphical interface from Xerox shown by Jobs. Steve quickly found several missing specialists, rented an office a little away from the main building, and the team got down to business. The prototype of the graphical interface was at their disposal, but it took years of hard work to refine it and create a breakthrough computer. At that time, the market was dominated by the IBM Corporation. Steve decided to build the promotion of the Macintosh computer based on the confrontation with this company and took the main idea from the cult dystopia of 1984 by Orwell. The giant faceless IBM wants to take away people's freedom, and Apple is a bright and brave company trying to prevent this. In support of this concept, a promo video was released, which is now considered a classic of world advertising. The commercial appeared 2 days before the presentation of the computer and maximized the degree of expectations. Finally, on January 24, 1984, it was time to show Macintosh to the world. The presentation hall with 2,700 seats was packed to the gills. The lights went out and the magic began. Macintosh was the first mass-produced computer that featured a built-in screen, a graphical interface, and a mouse. There was a set of useful programs with the computer that allowed you to work with text, build diagrams, or, for example, draw. Macintosh has forever changed the idea of what a personal computer should be, and it also left an indelible mark on the souls of people who participated in its creation. For them, it was years of hard work and sleepless nights, but at the same time, they managed to put their hand to something truly great. Steve considered the people from his team to be real creators, and creators usually sign their works. So Jobs asked everyone to leave a signature on the inside of the computer case.
I lost my wife in that process. I lost my children in that process. I lost the whole structure of my life was just changed forever by going and working on the Mac.
Because the work became so intense?
The work was intense. The commitment needed to do it was intense. I would go into work on a Tuesday morning and half the people would hate me. And I'd come back on Wednesday morning and half the people would hate me, but it was the other half. There were an awful lot of prima donnas in that outfit, so I was always in conflict.
Apple ordered part of the program for its computer from another company. One of the key third-party developers was a small at the time company, Microsoft. It was led by the already familiar Bill Gates. At first, Jobs and Gates got along very well. The conference at which the joint work on Macintosh was announced humorously parodied TV shows in which people are looking for a mate.
Welcome to the Macintosh software dating game.
My name is Bill Gates. I'm chairman of Microsoft. And during 1984, Microsoft expects to get half of its revenues from Macintosh software.
The honeymoon period of Apple and Microsoft ended quite quickly. Perhaps Bill Gates was not familiar with Picasso's quote about great artists. However, this did not prevent him from following the example of Jobs and stealing a promising technology. While working on Macintosh, Bill immediately realized the potential of the long-suffering Xerox graphical interface and soon announced an operating system based on it called Windows. Jobs was incredibly furious. Steve had a premonition of the huge success of Windows, and now, as we all know, he was damn right. The unpleasant story with Gates was the first in a series of problems that fell on Jobs and Apple. The Mac was a breakthrough computer, but its sales almost immediately fell seriously. This happened because at the development stage, the aesthetic inside Jobs from time to time defeated the engineer. Here is a vivid example. Steve was infuriated by the noise of the cooling fan and he ordered it to be removed. As a result, the computer was so hot during operation that it was popularly called a beige toaster. This and other problems were solved in the next versions of the computer, but the initial impression was spoiled. The situation at Apple became nervous and some key employees began to quit. Among those leaving was Steve Wozniak. All these years, he was mainly engaged in improving Apple II. Stopped seeing himself as a part of the company and wanted to start from scratch. After his friend left, Jobs became very stubborn, rude, and short-tempered. In the end, in the early autumn of '85, he was unequivocally given to understand that there would be no more work for him at Apple. So, 30-year-old Steve was left out of the company that he created himself.
I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. And so I decided to start over. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work.
A few months after his dismissal with his own money, Jobs created a company called Next. He began developing a computer for the needs of the education sector. Steve maniacally corrected the design, focused on the wrong things, and constantly disrupted the launch of the product. As a result, the computer failed and Jobs wasted millions of dollars. This unequivocal failure became a critical point and launched a long stage in Steve's life of rethinking himself and his actions. In the following years, his company slowly developed its own operating system, and Jobs himself looked out for the industry and talked about the future.
As we look back 10 years from now, the web is going to be the defining technology, the defining social moment of computing. I think it's going to be huge. I think it's breathed a whole new generation of life into personal computing.
During the years of rethinking himself, Jobs noticed a small company called Pixar, in the walls of which small animated cartoons were created. Steve saw the potential in these cartoons and bought Pixar and invested $5 million in it. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy at that time and was operating at loss. That is why Steve paid quite a large number of employees of the animation studio from his pocket.
In addition, the company signed a very unprofitable multi-year contract with Disney, which constrained Pixar in its actions. Time passed, and the company did not even reach self-sufficiency in any way. Anyone in Jobs' place would have left it long ago, and we wouldn't lie that Steve didn't think about it. But he didn't want the whole Silicon Valley talking about his defeat again.
To save the situation, he hired a talented financier, Lawrence Levy. Together, they found the money to finish the production of Toy Story, which they had high hopes for. In 1995, Toy Story was finally released. The cartoon received rave reviews, paid off in a few days, and became the first step on the long and glorious path of Pixar.
It's safe to say that without Steve, who was persistently looking for investors, conducted long, tedious negotiations with Disney, and continued to invest his money, all those studio cartoons that we love so much would have never been born.
At the same time, Steve meets a girl named Lauren Powell, and they start dating. Calm and easy to communicate, Lauren perfectly compensated for the difficult nature of Jobs. Their relationship developed successfully, and in 1991, Steve and Lauren got married.
The wedding ceremony for the couple was conducted by the invariable guru of Jobs, Koben Chino Adagawa.
Over time, the couple would have 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. Soon after the wedding, his first daughter, Lisa, would move into the Jobs house during her studies. A few years before, they gradually became closer, and now they've caught up.
I shouldn't have acted that way, Jobs admitted to his biographer, recalling how he initially rejected Lisa. Then I did not imagine myself as a father. I was not ready for this. If it were possible to change everything now, I would certainly behave better.
But of course, the story with the first brainchild of Jobs is not over. In 1997, Apple bought his company Next, and 12 years later, Steve had the opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past.
Back at Apple, Steve immediately set about trying to revive the company he had launched and which was suffering from too many products and poor management. At that time, he worked from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, as he was running Pixar in parallel. Jobs worked tirelessly while suffering from kidney stones. In the first days after his return, he invited the best Apple employees to the audience and, dressed in shorts and sneakers, stood on stage and asked everyone to tell him what's wrong with this place. After a few vague and soft answers, Jobs interrupted them. "It's the products. So what's wrong with the products?" And again, indistinct mutterings were heard. Jobs shouted, "The products suck. There's no sex in them anymore."
A few weeks after Steve's return, an advertising campaign was presented designed to show the world the new, reborn face of Apple. The updated concept was based on a bright slogan, "Think different," and its central element was an absolute brilliant commercial called Crazy Ones. There are two versions of it, voiced by a professional announcer and voiced by Jobs himself. It seems to me that Steve's version turned out better.
Here's to the crazy ones.
Steve breathed a new life into Apple and announced the revival of the company to the whole world. But the company will do it not just with ads. Throughout the year, the updated Apple team worked tirelessly, and as a result, in May of 1998, a new product appeared, a computer called iMac, which was a reinterpretation of the original Macintosh of 1984. The era of the internet was coming, and in order to emphasize that Apple corresponded to the spirit of the new time, Jobs decided to put the first letter of the word internet in the name of all subsequent developments of the company. The iMac was symbolically presented in the same room as the original Macintosh 14 years ago.
Dual stereo headphone jacks. We got the coolest mouse on the planet right here. Come on around. All of the connectors are inside one beautiful little door here, the Ethernet, the USB stuff. Around the back, we've got a really great handle here. The back of this thing looks better than the front of the other guys, by the way. And then around the side. So let's take one more swing around it so you can see. Incredible compared to anything else out there. It looks like it's from another planet. And a good planet. A planet with better designers.
The cute, lightweight, and compact iMac became a harbinger of the new millennium. In the first year, 800,000 computers were sold. It was a stunning success. Steve could breathe a sigh of relief. Apple was back in the big game. In the early noughties, the computer gradually turned into a kind of digital hub to which people connected other devices, cameras, and MP3 players. Jobs was regularly faced with the imperfection of these devices and eventually became eager to make one of them while working on the iMac. His choice fell on the MP3 player. That was because, firstly, Steve himself loved music, and secondly, millions of other people also loved it. That means that the player had a huge number of potential buyers. One day, Jobs learned that Toshiba had developed a miniature but at the same time roomy hard drive. Steve estimated that about 1,000 songs would fit on a player with such a drive, and because of its small size, it would be quite possible to put in a pocket. This was a huge breakthrough compared to other players at that time, which usually hold 15 to 16 songs and were much larger in size. They decided to call the new player iPod. To promote it, they shot a series of stylish commercials in which silhouettes of people danced to their favorite music. The snow-white case of the player and the bright white wires of the headphones instantly became recognizable. And when someone walked down the street with an iPod, everyone immediately understood this and envied him. And yet, thanks to stylish advertising, Apple, despite its 35-year history, became perceived as a young and progressive company. The iPod presentation took place in October of 2001.
iPod. What are we going to sell it for? 5 gigabyte hard drive, FireWire, 10-hour battery, 1,000 songs in your pocket, $399.
At first, the high price confused potential buyers, but quite quickly people appreciated the advantage of the new player, and iPods were sold like hotcakes. By 2007, half of Apple's revenue was from sales of this device. But it was impossible to rest on its laurels for a long time because mobile phone sales began to grow at an avalanche-like pace around the world. Steve understood that mobile phones would sooner or later be able to play music and destroy iPod at the same time. Therefore, he set out to urgently create a mobile phone.
I actually started on a tablet first. And I had this idea of being able to get rid of the keyboard, type on a multi-touch glass display. And I asked our folks, could we come up with a multi-touch display that we could type on, I could lay hands on and actually type on. And about 6 months later, they called me in and showed me this prototype display. And it was amazing. Thinking about building a phone at that time. And when I saw the rubber band, inertial scrolling, and a few of the other things, I thought, my God, we can build a phone out of this. And I put the tablet project on the shelf because the phone was more important.
After 2 years, the development of the mobile phone was completed. It was called iPhone and was shown to the public in January of 2007.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. And to unlock the phone, I just take my finger and slide it across. All right, you want to see that again? Go to sleep. We wanted something that you couldn't do by accident in your pocket, and just slide it across, boom. Well, how do I scroll through my list of artists? How do I do this? I just take my finger and I scroll.
This was probably the best of all Steve's presentations. We can talk for a long time about the importance of iPhone and how it has changed the world we are used to. At the moment, about 2.5 billion of these phones have been sold. I personally still remember how happy I was when I got my first iPhone. And although I have already changed many smartphones, I remember it with great warmth. What about you? Write in the comments which smartphone was your first and which one you have now. Let's see the results. After the release of the iPhone, Jobs returned to the tablet computer, which was called iPad. The word tablet has different meanings. That is why a ton of religious references were born from here. Steve was depicted as Jesus, and the newspapers wrote about the last time there was so much interest in the tablets was when the commandments were inscribed on them. The new product was introduced in 2010, and again caused a mighty furor. 1 million iPads were sold in the first month. At that time, it was the most successful launch of a consumer product in history.
Is because we've always tried to be at the intersection of technology and liberal arts. To be able to get the best of both, to make extremely advanced products from a technology point of view, but also have them be intuitive, easy to use, fun to use. And it's the combination of these two things that I think is
let us make the kind of creative products like the iPad.
During the presentation of iPhone, Jobs recalled the quote of the famous hockey player Wayne Gretzky: "I skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been." Perhaps it was thanks to this approach that Steve managed to turn Apple into the most expensive company in the world in 14 years. And yet, all these years, he tried to adhere to the slogan of his company: "I try to think different."
In business, a lot of things I call folklore. They're done because they were done yesterday and the day before. And if you're willing to sort of ask a lot of questions and think about things and work really hard, you can learn business pretty fast. It's not the hardest thing in the world. And of course, Jobs' share of success was brought by his own gab. He had a unique way of creating his own reality, a distortion field that he used to convince people that his personal beliefs were reality, and that was how he promoted his companies. Before Apple launched iTunes in 2001, Jobs met with dozens of musicians to convince record labels to collaborate with iTunes. One of those whom Jobs convinced was the outstanding trumpeter Wynton Marsalis. Marsalis admitted that Jobs talked for 2 hours without stopping. He was obsessed, he said. After a while, I started looking at him instead of at the computer because I was fascinated by his passion. Also, on the way to victory, he relied heavily on manipulative tactics, especially at meetings with the heads of the most influential companies in the world.
But no matter how high Steve flew, he remained just a human. In October of 2003, Steve was diagnosed with cancer, and for one reason known only to him, he postponed the operation for 9 months. According to doctors, he actually committed suicide. The operation was successful, but a few years later, the cancer returned and Steve's liver began to fail. He needed a transplant. In March of 2009, when Jobs was close to death, a donor appeared. The transplant was successful, but during the operation, doctors found spots on the membrane that covers the internal organs. It became clear that Steve didn't have much time. After a few months, he got back on his feet and appeared at the next presentation. There, in an uncharacteristically trust-based manner, he told about what had happened.
As some of you may know, about 5 months ago, I had a liver transplant. So I now have the liver of a mid-20s person who died in a car crash and was generous enough to donate their organs. And I wouldn't be here without such generosity. So,
the year 2010 was one of the most productive in Steve's life. iPad was released, as well as the new versions of the iPhone and iPod.
Interestingly, Jobs' children rarely used Apple products. Once, a journalist from the New York Times asked Jobs a question. Apparently, your children are crazy about the iPad. And he got the answer, they haven't used it. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. The gadgets with which Jobs' name was associated, he easily replaced by communicating with children and discussing books, history with them, or anything else. And at the same time, none of them had a desire to get an iPhone or iPad during a conversation with their father.
And yet, in these recent years, the final reconciliation of long-standing rivals happened. The aged legends of the computer industry, Bill and Steve, participated in a joint interview in which they sincerely and touchingly talked about the old days.
No, it's been fun to work together. I actually kind of miss some of the people aren't around anymore. You know, people come and go in this industry. It's nice when somebody sticks around and have some context of all the things that have worked and not worked, and when it counted, to take the risk to bring in something new.
You know, I think of most things in life as either a Bob Dylan or a Beatles song. But there's that one line in that one Beatles song, you and I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead. And that's clearly true here.
In the summer of 2011, Steve's condition deteriorated sharply. The cancer returned for the third time and spread to the bones and all internal organs. It became clear that Steve's time had come to an end. It took him a month and a half to gain the determination to leave the company that he had given his whole life. On August 24, 2011, Jobs wrote a farewell letter which he decided to personally read to the board of directors. At that time, Steve could no longer walk, so he was secretly taken to Apple in a wheelchair. His letter consisted of only 8 sentences and began as follows. I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come.
We were just the lucky partnership. He was lucky to have me in the beginning, but I am much, incredibly lucky to him for everything in my life. He gets a reputation for being a strong leader and being brash, but to me, he was just always so kind, such a good friend, and I'm just going to miss him.
All right, Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple. Thank you very much. Well said. Thank you. I really appreciate you talking to him.
In 1979, Apple II computers were first brought to one of the computer stores in Iowa for sale. In honor of this event, a story was filmed, during which the store employees were interviewed for a short time.
A computer is an educational device. It is in fact a direct reflection of your own imagination, your own intelligence, your own programming skills. And once you are given the freedom in which to create things and to see the immediate response on the screen, then it becomes a very enjoyable experience. You go on to involve yourself in many other things.
It seems to be a very fantastic and hypnotic field. Once you start, you just can't stop. It's something you can't explain.
Every year, we take new steps on the way to the computer era, and I personally regret that Steve Jobs is no longer with us on this path, with his brilliant flair and ability to see the next step in advance.
But as Steve himself said, death is very likely the best single invention of life. It is life's change agent.
Every year, we take new steps on the way to the computer age, and frankly, it's sad that Steve Jobs, with his brilliant flair and ability to see the next step in advance, is no longer with us on this path. To continue learning about the lives of the same talented and legendary people who changed this world, subscribe to our channel. You are watching the Biographer History channel. See you again on the pages of history.